On the day Evan Carter was supposed to sign his life into $800 million, his hands would not stop shaking, not from fear of losing the money, but because of the woman on the cheap TV in the corner of the boardroom. On paper, he was everything wealthy American families dream of. White father from old Atlanta money, black mother who fought her way up corporate ladders, a real estate empire waiting with his name on it. The kind of inheritance that tears families apart if you even hint at walking away from it. But while the lawyers lined up the documents and the cameras outside waited for their perfect photo, Evan wasn't looking at the contract. He was staring at Maya Brooks on the news, standing in front of a painted wall on the west side, hoodie on, hair pulled back, talking about kids who get written off before they even turn 10. He hadn't seen her face on a screen in 15 years, not since his family quietly helped erase her from his future and called it protecting the legacy. In that glass tower above Atlanta, his father sat at the head of the table like a judge, tapping a gold pen, reminding Evan that every generation had signed these same papers, that a good son knows when to stop chasing childish things. His mother, who loved to tell her friends she didn't see color, only good values, was smiling that tight smile some folks wear when they're pretending grace, while quietly dismissing every black woman who doesn't fit their idea of polished. They talked about Maya like a phase, a neighborhood crush, a girl from that side of town who should be grateful they ever let her into their house. In front of him sat a pen, a line, and a number that could buy almost anything in America except the peace of knowing he hadn't betrayed the only person who ever loved him before the money. So when his father said, "Son, sign, and stop making this harder than it needs to be," Evan looked from the contract to the TV one last time and made a choice most people only imagine making in private. He pushed the papers back, stood up in front of the whole room, and walked out of his own inheritance for a woman his family pretended not to remember. And as he stepped into that elevator, heading down toward the street she still called home, he knew this wasn't just about love. It was about finally deciding whose story his life belonged to. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. When Evan Carter stepped out of that elevator, leaving a legacy behind him like a coat he no longer wanted to wear, 1,000 questions followed him into the Atlanta heat, questions most people in his position would bury, but questions he could no longer ignore. And if you've ever loved somebody you were never supposed to love, then maybe these questions will feel a little too familiar. Because the truth is, you cannot understand the weight of what Evan just did unless you understand what happened 20 years ago, back when he was just a boy from Buckhead sneaking glances at a girl from the west side, who made him forget every rule he'd been raised with. Why did his family hate Maya Brooks in the first place? They never said the words out loud, but you know how some folks speak whole paragraphs with a single look. Was it where she came from? Was it the braided hair his aunties whispered about? Was it the fact that she didn't fit into their carefully polished picture of what the Carter name should look like, or was it simply that Maya saw him as a human being before she ever saw him as an heir? And what happened 20 years ago that tore them apart so brutally that her name was never spoken again in that mansion? Why didn't he fight harder back then? Why didn't he chase her when his family separated them like two kids caught doing something wrong? And why, after all these years, hasn't he loved anyone else? Not the polished debutantes, not the business partners' daughters, not the women his family practically arranged for him to meet over expensive dinners and stiff conversations. And now, as he drives toward the side of Atlanta where Maya still lives and works, there's one question no amount of wealth can answer. Will she even open the door when he shows up? After 15 years of silence, regret, and unfinished sentences, will she look at him with anger, or heartbreak, or nothing at all? And when Atlanta finds out, because cities like this have long memories and fast mouths, what happens to a man who walked away from everything most people chase their whole lives, just to face the one woman who may not want anything from him anymore? These are the questions sitting heavy on his chest as he heads west, deeper into the neighborhoods he left behind, toward a door he's not sure he deserves to knock on. And whether you've loved someone from a distance, lost someone you never got over, or lived with a regret you wish you could rewrite, maybe this part of the story will make you wonder what you would do if the past suddenly had a second chance. If you want to understand why Evan Carter's entire world shifted the moment he saw Maya Brooks again, you have to go back 2 decades, back to a humid Georgia summer when they were just kids trying to escape the noise of their own lives. Their story didn't start in a mansion or some perfect high school hallway. It started in the basement of a black church on the west side of Atlanta, where the youth choir rehearsed under flickering fluorescent lights. Deacons slept through sermons in the back row, and aunties fanned themselves like life depended on it while fussing over whose potato salad belonged on the communion table and whose did not. That church basement smelled like old hymnals, hair grease, and the lemon floor cleaner Sister Martha swore could fix any sin. And somehow, in all that chaos, young Maya found her peace. At 15, she was the girl with the worn-out sketchbook she bought from Dollar Tree and a pouch of colored pencils she kept sharpening down to stubs. Her mother worked 2 jobs, one at a nursing home and one stocking shelves overnight, so Maya babysat neighborhood kids, helped with chores, and tried to stretch every dollar just far enough so she could still afford paper to draw on. Evan, on the other hand, lived in a Buckhead mansion with wide glass windows and parents who measured people by last names, schools, and appropriate circles. His father believed in firm handshakes and firmer boundaries. His mother liked to pretend she didn't judge anyone, she just used words like polished, refined, and girls who fit our world, usually while side-eyeing anything that looked too black, too loud, too real, or too close to the parts of Atlanta their family pretended didn't exist. But none of that mattered the day Evan ended up volunteering at that West Side church for a school project. He was 17, lanky, soft-spoken, and dressed like he was going to brunch instead of choir practice. Maya noticed him instantly, not because of the money he came from, but because he looked like someone who didn't know where to put his hands or how to stand without apologizing to the air around him. She teased him for looking lost. He teased her for sketching more than singing. And in the weeks that followed, they created their own little world between choir risers and old hymn books. Maya drew him when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Evan joked that her sketches made him look better than he did in real life. She laughed at how stiff he was when the aunties tried to make him clap on beat. He watched her with a quiet awe he didn't yet know how to name. Those small moments grew into something fragile and hopeful, shared snacks after rehearsal, whispered jokes during sermons, a secret handshake they invented just to irritate the youth director. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was just young love before the world had a chance to ruin it. But the world always finds a way. And if you listened carefully back then, you could already hear the tension humming underneath their happiness, the way Evan's father tightened his jaw when Maya's name came up, the way his mother complimented her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way Maya overheard one of his relatives say, "that neighborhood," like a warning. Evan didn't understand it fully yet, but Maya did. She always did. By the end of that summer, their private world cracked. Evan's parents arranged a surprise opportunity, an elite academic program out of state, presented like a blessing but delivered like a punishment. Evan argued, begged, tried to reason with them, but they were firm. This is your future. Don't let anyone hold you back. His mother even pulled Maya aside one Sunday, placed a manicured hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "He has a chance to become someone important. Don't stand in his way, sweetheart." It sounded like kindness, but Maya felt the sting under every word. The day Evan left, he never saw Maya. He didn't get the chance. His father rushed the move, packed his bags, and put him on a flight before he could warn her. Maya found out from one of the choir kids hours too late. She walked home with that Dollar Tree sketchbook pressed against her chest, trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway. She told herself she shouldn't be surprised. Boys like Evan didn't stay for girls like her, not when money, pressure, and family power were involved. 20 years passed. And now, when Maya finally opens her front door and sees him standing there older, heavier with regret, stripped of the arrogance his world tried to build around him, she doesn't smile, doesn't welcome him, doesn't even move. She just looks at him with the kind of hurt that has been waiting for an explanation for far too long and says, "You vanished, Evan. So why are you standing on my porch now?" Evan didn't expect forgiveness at the doorway, but he also didn't expect Maya's silence to feel heavier than any boardroom he had ever stood in. When he tried to speak, the words came out clumsy, raw, like someone trying to rebuild a bridge with their bare hands. He told her about the pressure, the meetings behind closed doors, the way his father framed it as duty and his mother framed it as love, how they used fear and guilt until he felt like a son choosing between two impossible roads. He admitted he should have fought harder, called sooner, found a way back. But Maya didn't flinch, didn't soften. She crossed her arms and leaned on the door frame, watching him with a steady gaze that told him a grown woman was standing where that 15-year-old girl once stood. She said quietly, "You think I'm supposed to be impressed because you finally found a backbone? Evan, you broke something in me. You can't just show up because life finally shook you awake." Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again, and again, and again. His parents had discovered the truth. His father's voice exploded through the speaker, shouting about shareholders, reputation, and the embarrassment of his only son walking out in front of cameras like a fool chasing some childhood fantasy. His mother followed with the whispery guilt that had shaped half his life, how he had hurt the family, how he was throwing everything away, how she was worried, sick. Maya listened, not with sympathy, but with the kind of weary recognition Black women learn early, the tone of people who want control wrapped in concern. She shook her head, stepped back slightly, and said, "That's your world, Evan, not mine." As if on cue, a voice floated from across the street. Mrs. Jenkins, the older lady who spent her afternoons on the porch pretending not to notice neighborhood gossip, was peeking through her blinds, whispering into her phone, "Girl, is that the Carter boy? The one with the money? Lord, somebody get outside." A moment later, 2 more neighbors appeared on stoops, pretending to water plants they had ignored all week. By then, the news had moved faster than his father's lawyers. A blog post was already circulating. Carter Air walks out of board meeting for mystery woman in Southwest Atlanta. The comments were ruthless people, speculating, judging, inserting Maya's name without knowing a thing about her. Evan saw it on his screen, and for the first time, he felt the humiliation that Maya had lived with for years, the scrutiny without mercy, the heat of eyes that assumed but never understood. He turned his phone off and looked at her, really looked, not as the boy who once adored her drawings, but as a man who finally understood the price she paid every time the world dismissed her. He said quietly, "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking you to forget anything. But if I have to choose between their money and you, I'm choosing you. Every time. And I don't need anything from you in return." Maya's jaw tightened as if the weight of his words pressed on old wounds. She didn't step toward him. She didn't step away. She just waited. So Evan took a breath and let the next sentence fall from a place honest enough to scare him. "If you don't want me here as a man, that's fine. Let me help where it matters. Let me volunteer at your center. No strings, no agenda, just service." Maya didn't answer, not with words, not yet. But her silence wasn't rejection this time. It was the quiet pause of someone deciding whether a second chance is mercy or a mistake they can't afford to repeat. Evan showed up at the center the next morning before the sun could even finish waking up the city. He didn't dress like a man who once wore tailored suits and answered to executives. He wore an old t-shirt, paint-stained jeans, and shoes he didn't mind ruining. The moment he stepped inside, the kids looked at him with the kind of curiosity only children can get away with, wide-eyed, confused, and halfway ready to test him. Within an hour, He had 3 toddlers climbing his back like a jungle gym, 2 teenagers arguing about whether he looked more like a math teacher or a lost tourist, and a little girl handing him a glue stick like it was a sacred responsibility. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a Carter heir. He felt human. The black aunties in charge of the kitchen and supply room were far less impressed. They watched him struggle to lift plywood sheets, wipe sweat off his forehead, and accidentally smack himself with a paint roller. One of them, Miss Alberta, shook her head and said loud enough for half the building to hear, "He can lift them boxes, but can he lift your spirits, baby?" Another replied, "Mm-hmm, 'cause a man can lift drywall all day and still drop you emotionally by sundown." Evan pretended he didn't hear them, but Maya did, and the small smile she tried to hide didn't go unnoticed. As the days went by, little glimpses of the boy Maya once loved began slipping through the cracks of the man he had become. He remembered the way she liked her coffee too sweet, with just enough creamer to count as a dessert. He laughed the same crooked laugh he had back in that church basement. He got quiet whenever he watched her paint with the kids, the same way he used to fall silent whenever she sketched him during choir practice. But there was something new too, an older, steadier version of him. A man who didn't rush to fix everything, who listened more than he spoke, who didn't try to charm his way out of accountability. A man who seemed to understand that rebuilding trust required concrete work, not empty apologies. Evan learned quickly that the West Side had its own ecosystem, one built on loyalty, earned respect, and the kind of community ties money couldn't buy. He showed up to church cookouts, learning quickly that you don't just grab any potato salad unless you know who made it. He helped set up tents, carry folding chairs, and clean grills. Kids dragged him into pickup basketball games he absolutely was not athletic enough for. Old men at the domino table studied him like a textbook, calling him Buckhead, until he proved he could take a joke without getting defensive. Every moment humbled him, softened him, shaped him. But his world wasn't done pulling at him. His father sent legal documents through a courier pages thick with fine print, threatening to cut him out of the family permanently unless he signed an agreement ending all ties with Maya. At the bottom was a quiet offer, a trust fund he could still keep if he chose wealth over her. His mother's calls alternated between pleading, scolding, guilt, and the kind of trembling fear she used whenever she wanted him to fold. She talked about legacy, sacrifice, the Carter name. She cried over the phone. She begged him not to throw everything away for a woman who doesn't fit. Each voicemail chipped at him, but none of them changed his direction. Then one afternoon, when Evan wasn't paying attention, Maya accidentally opened his bag looking for a staple gun and found the stack of trust fund papers. She didn't touch them at first, she just stood there, staring down at the signatures, the numbers, the conditions. It felt like someone had reached inside her chest and pulled out every insecurity she buried over the years. She saw her childhood all over again, people whispering she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong beside someone like him, that boys like Evan only chose girls like her when they were young and reckless, never as adults with futures to protect. When Evan walked into the room and saw her holding the documents, his heart dropped. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse him. She just whispered, "I won't be the reason you burn your whole life down." Her voice cracked the way it did when she was 15, and quietly blaming herself for his departure. And Evan stepped closer, shook his head, and said softly, "Maya, my life felt like ashes before you." She looked away, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. She didn't push him out, but she didn't draw him in, either. Instead, she set the papers down, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and said the words he feared most, "I need some space." It wasn't rejection. It was protection of herself, of the children watching, of the small, fragile hope she had started to let grow again. And as she walked away, Evan realized that choosing her was the easy part. Convincing her she was worth choosing, that was the real battle still ahead. The days that followed were quiet in a way that made every emotion louder. Maya kept her distance, pouring herself into the center, into the kids, into anything that wasn't him. Evan respected her space, but he didn't retreat back into the comfort of silence like he did at 18. Instead, he waited patiently, painfully until the moment came when he had to make a choice not just privately, but publicly. And that moment arrived sooner than anyone expected. A group of Carter investors called an emergency meeting downtown, expecting Evan to apologize for his unprofessional behavior and misaligned priorities. They assumed he would walk in with his head down and his signature ready this time. But when Evan stepped into that boardroom full of suits and stiff smiles, he didn't come to beg. He came to tell the truth. He stood at the end of the long table, hands steady, voice calm. He said, "If you're all here to convince me that I need my father's approval or his money to be a man worth something, you don't know me at all." A few chuckles rose around the room. They thought he was bluffing. They stopped laughing when he pulled out the trust fund documents and said, "This is what you think integrity costs. I don't want it. And if the Carter name can only continue through control and fear, then maybe the Carter name needs to fall." Then, in front of men who once saw him as their future leader, he ripped the papers in half clean, precise, final. The room froze. His phone vibrated with furious calls he refused to answer. His parents' faces dropped in real time as the news spread. For once, the humiliation wasn't his to carry. Meanwhile, miles away at the center, Maya was in the art room cleaning brushes when Evan finally arrived to really talk. She didn't turn around when she heard him come in. She didn't have the strength yet. He stood behind her for a long moment before saying softly, "You deserved the truth a long time ago." The words hit the air with a weight she recognized but didn't expect. Then he told her everything he had kept buried for 20 years. He told her how his father had threatened her mother's job and hinted at causing trouble for the youth director if Evan didn't leave quietly. How his mother told him Maya would ruin the Carter legacy and make him carry responsibilities that weren't his to carry. How they framed it as doing the right thing for both families, even as they tore both teenagers apart. Maya dropped the brush and finally turned to face him. Her eyes were glassy, furious, and wounded all at once. She asked, barely above a whisper, "Why didn't you come back?" And Evan told her the truth he had never admitted out loud. "Because I was a scared kid raised to believe pleasing them was the only way to survive. They made me feel like choosing you meant destroying everything, and I didn't know who I was without their approval." His voice cracked as he added, "But I know now. I know because of you." The room felt too small for all the pain that surfaced. Maya finally let herself feel it, the years of being treated as less than, the whispers at church, the looks from Evan's relatives, the memories of standing in the choir room wondering why she wasn't enough. She pressed both hands to her face, trying to hide the tears she didn't want him to see. But he stepped closer, not touching her, just letting her know he wasn't running this time. She said through quiet sobs, "Do you know what it does to a girl to grow up believing she's not equal to the people she loves? That no matter how hard she tries, she'll always be from the wrong side of somebody's map?" Evan swallowed hard and said, "That's why I've been in therapy for the last 3 years, trying to unlearn everything they taught me, trying to grow into someone who doesn't fold, doesn't hide, doesn't choose fear over love, someone who could deserve you if you ever looked my way again." It wasn't a speech meant to win her. It was confession, messy, honest, and imperfect. Maya cried harder at that, not from weakness, but from finally hearing what she should have heard 20 years earlier. All the hurt, all the longing, all the grief she buried under responsibility came rushing back. She didn't fall into his arms. She didn't kiss him. She just stood there, trembling, letting the truth wash over her like a storm she had spent half her life outrunning. And in that small art room, surrounded by paint-stained tables and childhood drawings, the truth finally sat between them, heavy, heartbreaking, but real. This wasn't just a reunion. This was two people finally standing in the wreckage of what was taken from them, deciding whether they had the strength to rebuild. Time has a quiet way of revealing who people really are, and in the weeks that followed, the city watched the Carter family unravel and rebuild in ways nobody expected. Maya kept her distance long enough to breathe again, long enough to gather herself, long enough to decide what pieces of her heart were worth risking a second time. Evan didn't chase her. He showed up to work, to serve, to help the children paint their worlds brighter just as he promised. And slowly, the community saw something shift. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was steady, humble, consistent. And that consistency is what reached the people who once stood in the way. One afternoon, while the kids were gluing construction paper to cardboard and arguing over who got the purple glitter, Maya looked up and froze. Evan's mother, always immaculate, always put together, always ready with a polite smile that hid sharper judgments, was standing by the door, alone. No husband, no lawyers, no entourage. She didn't walk in immediately. She stood for a long moment watching Maya kneel beside a little boy, guiding his small hands across the canvas, talking to him with a tenderness that softened even the harshest corners of the room. Something in the older woman's face cracked just a little, but enough that Maya noticed. Finally, she stepped forward. Her voice was stiff, uneven in a way Maya had never heard before. She said, "I owe you something I should have said years ago." Maya didn't respond, so she continued, "I thought I was protecting my son, but I realize now I was protecting an image, not him, and definitely not you." She looked down at her hands before adding, quieter, "I am sorry, truly." It wasn't poetic, it wasn't perfect, but it was real raw in a way wealthy people rarely let themselves be. Maya nodded, not forgiving yet, but acknowledging the effort. And for someone like Evan's mother, effort was a breakthrough. His father never came with speeches. He wasn't built for that. But truckloads of art supplies started showing up at the center easels, canvases, brushes, notebooks, even new flooring for the studio. Every delivery slip came unsigned. Every invoice quietly paid. Evan shrugged when Maya asked if it was him. It wasn't. Some apologies don't use words, they use actions because pride won't let the tongue move. The real turning point came at the children's art show, a small Saturday event where the neighborhood gathered to celebrate the kids' hard work. Families crowded into the room, aunties whispering compliments, uncles stumbling over art terms they didn't actually know, children dragging their parents to see their masterpieces. Maya wore a simple dress with paint stains she hadn't noticed, and Evan stood beside her holding a stack of programs he kept forgetting to hand out. And then, almost unnoticed at first, Evan's father walked in. He stayed by the back wall, too stiff, too tall, too uncomfortable to blend in. But he didn't leave. He watched a little boy tug Evan's sleeve. He watched Maya hug a child who just won Best Use of Color. And for the first time, the man who once threatened to tear two families apart realized he no longer controlled the future he tried so hard to shape. When the kids performed their small presentation and the room burst with applause, his father clapped too, slowly, hesitantly, but he clapped, and Maya saw it. Evan saw it, and it meant more than anyone expected. Later, when the room cleared and only a handful of people remained, Evan walked to the center of the studio. His heart beat so hard he wondered if the whole building could hear it. The aunties stood nearby pretending they weren't watching, wiping non-existent dust from their eyes. The kids sat cross-legged on the floor like an audience waiting for a magic trick. Maya turned, confused, when she saw Evan kneeling, but the moment she realized what was happening, her eyes filled instantly. He didn't give a rehearsed speech. He didn't promise perfection. He simply said, "You were my first piece, my first love, and the only person who ever saw the man I wanted to be. If you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you the way I should have chosen you from the beginning." The room fell so quiet the children stopped fidgeting. Maya covered her mouth. trying to breathe through the shock and the memory of everything they survived to reach this moment. But when she nodded slow, trembling, but sure, the room exploded into cheers. The kids yelled. The aunties cried so dramatically someone handed out tissues. Even Evan's father, still at the back wall, lowered his head like a man humbled by his own mistakes, and just like that, something heavy lifted from the room, replaced by something lighter: hope, forgiveness, the possibility of a future built on truth instead of fear. Maya whispered yes through tears. Evan slid the ring onto her hand with shaking fingers, and the world outside felt suddenly small compared to the one they had built here together. Sometimes the richest empire a man can inherit isn't made of money, it's the courage to choose love. And the woman still standing there when the dust settles. And now that we've walked through this journey with Evan and Maya, through the heartbreak, the reckoning, the courage, and the healing, I want to leave you with a few questions that sit a little deeper than the story itself, because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors. They make us look at ourselves, our choices, our families, and the kinds of love we believe we deserve. So let me ask you gently, right where you are, would you have opened that door after 20 years? Would you have stood there on your porch, looking at the face of the person who once broke you, and allowed your heart to crack open again? Or would you have closed it and kept walking, protecting your peace, protecting your scars? There's no right answer, but I want you to think about it. And what do you believe shaped Evan's path, more destiny or choice? Did life push him back toward Maya because their souls were tied from the beginning? Or did he become the man she deserved because he finally decided to grow past the limitations of his upbringing? Was this fate, or a man choosing truth over comfort for the first time in his life? And most importantly, what healed you the most in this story? Was it Maya finally being seen and honored the way she always deserved? Was it Evan's mother learning how to apologize after a lifetime of silence? Was it his father lowering his pride long enough to clap for children he once overlooked? Or was it the way two people, separated by class, color, and circumstance, rebuilt something that was broken, not perfectly, not magically, but honestly? Whatever part moved you, hold on to it. Let it remind you that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's steady. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it shows up at your doorstep when you least expect it, asking for a chance to do better. And if you think this story was something, wait until you hear the next one. Trust me, you'll want to be here for that one. Subscribe for more timeless folk tales and stories that touch the soul. See you in the next one.